We left off here on page 222 here, where it says, wishing someone a happy birthday. A happy birthday. Pretty bad when people always, you notice how people always have to remind you about it. You know, well, today's my birthday. You want to wish me a happy birthday? So if it was something that was really needed, when it be broadcast, you know. Like, okay, it says, it's amazing just how many words in the English language have been formulated throughout the centuries to honor, okay? To honor, give honor to the pagan gods and the goddesses, okay? And one of the well-known and most popular birthday greetings in the world is happy birthday, okay? Happy birthday. People don't even realize what they're doing when they you know, do these things, because they're so wrapped up in these things to where, remember, it's normal for them to worship the gods. They're born into God worship. Their lives are dedicated to the gods, as we talked about before about the birthday, you know, the genius for the boys and Juno for the girls. And these spirits are preyed upon, and that's really what a birthday is. You know, when you celebrate the birthday, you're having a festival in honor of your god or your goddess, and you're asking them to protect you and lead and guide you and all this stuff, you know. So you can see this is exactly what Yahweh said. And remember, all of these things came out of Egypt, okay? And this is why Yahweh said, don't go back to Egypt. You know, he warned the people. And he said, you know, get away from all those gods that you've left, supposedly leave behind. You know, you're supposed to leave all these things behind and go on. And he warned them over and over again. He says, you know, if you inquire as to how their gods are worshipped, you're going to fall. But they did it anyway. And you see that in the time of Samuel, how Samuel had to correct them. Okay, he says, have you ever wondered why anyone wishes a happy birthday upon someone else? Well, in pagan antiquity, individuals were wishing the same thing upon each other. But then the initiated knew the God, which, you know, they knew these things. Now, when we talk about the initiation, okay, remember these things, Satan has always kept who she is a secret, remember? It wasn't until the house of Yahweh came out with the book, you know, unveiling Satan who she is, her true identity, revealing these things, that the world really had no idea. You know, there may have been some guests and so forth about it, but you can see how that, you know, through the ways in which she influenced the people and the gods, and that she was worshipped as a male deity or she was worshipped as a female deity in some places and stuff. So she's very deceiving. Remember, in the very beginning, Yahweh said she's the most subtle creature that Yahweh had made, and she uses it to her own well-being, so to speak. But she's not too well now, is she? Because she's dying. Okay. Let's see. Okay. In pagan ancestry, okay, pagan antiquity, individuals were wishing the same thing upon each other, but then the initiated knew the God which was being honored when this wish was being bestowed, but to those who were not initiated, this God was hidden. Okay? So this wish then, and now and still has been upon the basis referred to luck, okay, and fate. Okay, so everything was based upon, you know, notice, you know, with Yahweh, things are based upon blessings, right? If you keep Yahweh's laws, you will be blessed. If you break them, you will be cursed. Here, the gods refer to luck or fate. In other words, some things may go your way, some things may not go your way, okay? And so, the reason why is because the gods can't offer blessings, you know? And the gods never did offer blessings. They never offered to bless their followers. They always put fear in their followers and always made their followers think that they just couldn't do without them. You know, they had to give them worship, or else they wouldn't have anything at all. So the gods always put fear and intimidation in the worshipers and actually threatened to take away what they had if they didn't give them honor and glory. Yahweh's not like that. Yahweh doesn't force himself upon us, right? He never forces himself upon anyone. He always makes it very easy for people. Just do what I say. All right, so luck and fate upon an individual through the gods and the goddesses that would worship them, that worshiped then and are still being worshipped today. Now we're getting to the Happy, and Apis, who was ancient gods of Egypt. It says, in order to fully understand how the abominable god's name, Hap, that's H-A-P, came into our English language, we must begin with the hidden system of mystery. Now you also have Hap, H-A-P, but also H-A-P-I, which is happy, okay? Now, we've got to look at this hidden system of mystery that came about in ancient Babylon. Now, we have previously read an article about Nimrod, okay, the Nimrod system, how Cush was the first man who turned against Yahweh, and he was inspired to through this Nimrod system that he came up with, okay, is how he came about. Of course, before him was, of course, Cain, but Cush was the one who set up an entire system based upon deception and based upon rebellion. Okay, and he rebelled against Yahweh, and he was very open on this, and he built this entire system to teach others to do the same thing. So he turned against Yahweh, and he built the kingdom of Babylon. However, in the course of Cush's life, this Nimrod system, it says that he died an untimely death. And then later, the wife became pregnant and bore a son, which all it has to do, too, with incest, remember. So it's always talking about breaking the laws of Yahweh. And that's what all the God worship is based upon. Every law of Yahweh is broken through God worship, and you can see it in the way that they worship their gods. So it says here that later she claimed, that the son was actually Nimrod, the Nimrod system, and so forth. So this is how Semiramis attained the title of being the mother of the gods and of men. And she gave birth to a reborn god, and Nimrod was supposedly resurrected to life as Ninus, the son. In other words, the god was the son, and the son was a god. So here you have the concept of being a god man, okay? And that's what Yahweh said in the very beginning. Don't make yourselves into the image of the gods, okay? But that's always been something that mankind has always strove for. He's always tried to make himself into the image of a god. But if that's what Yahweh said, don't follow the ways of the gods, or you end up being just like them, and you make yourself into a god. And that's exactly what they did, and that's exactly what the rulers did. The rulers made themselves into gods, and they set themselves up as lords over this subject. Well, here it says the cult of Ishtar, Semiramis, or Easter, was the personification of regenerative motherhood. Okay, personification simply means that she became the attributes of a person was attributed to her. Of regenerative motherhood flourished in Babylon and in Egypt, and this great mother was Isis. Isis. Well, we hear about Isis today, don't we? As the newest terror threat, is actually named after this great mother goddess. Okay, and it's kind of ironic because the fact that Mary is attacking them, wanting to destroy them, but at the same time they're turning around and destroying others and doing all these abominable things. But it really shows that they're actually servants. As it says, your servants to whom you obey. So they do obey the great mother. Now, uniformly, the mystery gods of the ancient world were conceived as hero gods. Okay, and you still hear that word today. People call one another, oh, he's my hero. But they were called hero gods of the dying and rising type. Okay, because they would die and then they would rise. Now, that's the difference between the gods and Yahweh. Yahweh can't die. Yahweh has never died, and Yahweh can't die. Okay, and this is the reason why the Savior, Yeshua, is not Yahweh. He wasn't a God-man. He wasn't a pre-existent being because he died. Okay, but the gods teach that here they were. They lived as God men here on earth, and then they would die and then they would be resurrected. Now, these things would carry on throughout the year after year after year after year, showing you that death was possible among the gods. And that's why Yahweh allowed these things. And remember, when he took the children of Israel out of Egypt, he said the whole reason behind all that was the judgment upon the gods. And really, he was showing them that, look at these gods continually die every year and are resurrected, They continually die and are resurrected and so forth, But that's not what Yahweh says. He says, until once will a man die, and then he will be judged, right? And then comes the resurrection. So you can see that the gods try to do these things over and over and over again, but they can never bring these things to completion anyway. They always try and imitate what Yahweh has in store. But they can't do it. Now, because of the God's own experience, okay, the candidates to be initiated into the mystery religions might feel sure of the similar triumph over the evils of human experience. Be of good cheer, you of the mystery, your God is saved, for this is also shall be salvation from ills. So that's kind of a saying that they would say in this terminology in the mystery religion, giving honor to their gods, thinking that, this was something that could be attained through the worship of these gods. But Yahweh says death is the only thing that's going to come. Well, by means of this initiatory rites, okay, which included various baptisms and washings and purifications, the candidates were made a person fit enough to approach deity. So they tried to do these things so that they could become pure and they could reach the state of becoming a god, okay? To be a god. So they had their baptisms, they had their washings, they had their purifications. You remember sometimes they would take the blood of a pig and go and sacrifice it and take the blood of a pig and smear it all over them and so forth and go out into the ocean and do a ritual cleansing and all this kind of stuff, okay? But you can see when they did that kind of stuff, what we know about these things and what Yahweh said in his word about don't touch the dead carcass and this abomination, when they would smear this pig blood all over them, then they were just putting these worms and the confusion more, rubbing it more into their bodies because they would rub it all over them, all over their skin. So they were just forcing these parasites and things into their body, which of course went into their brain, which just totally confused them even more and kept them that way. So once they got wrapped up into their God worship, they remained in it. So by means of these things, okay, the candidate was made fit enough to approach deity. Finally, in cultivating rites of communion, revelation, and deification, the union of divinity and humanity was experimentally accomplished, okay? But the chief distinction of the mysteries in comparison, mystery was a great word for it. But the chief distinction of the mysteries, the Catholic Church still uses that today. You have the mysteries of the rosary. You know what the rosary is? The rosary is those beads that they count, they measure it off. You got the crucifix, a little cross, and then you got one bead, I think, and then three, and then another one or something. And there's a piece that joins it together, and there's a loop, okay? Well, when you look at it, you've got this loop, and then you got a cross on the end. A few beads come down the cross. It's actually forming the symbol for eternal life, or the Ankh, which was called in the Egyptian, and it comes straight from Egypt, But you count off on these beads, and today, people still have their prayer beads that they hold in their hands and stuff. But they have the rosary, and they murmur, the prayer over and over and over again, repetition over and over again, until they go all the way through it. But it's called the mysteries of the rosaries. There's certain things that they say that you dedicate certain things to, and at certain times of the year and all this kind of stuff. But this great mother, the great mother religion and her mystery spin-offs had a dynamic hold over the ancient pagan peoples, because the mother promised them that just as her her husband's son, okay, he was a husband, but he was also the son, okay, had died, he was resurrected to life. So you see, you notice here what they're trying to teach you is immortality. And because he was resurrected to life after death, so could they be immortal. Okay? The lie from the very beginning, where Satan told Eve, you shall be as the gods, knowing righteousness and evil. You shall not die. All right? So right there, she automatically told her about immortality, saying that, you have an immortal soul. Don't worry about it. If you do this, Eve, you're not going to die. Yahweh knows that you'll be like the gods. So this God worship and all of these things about the fakeness of the resurrection and all these things were taught way back then. Okay? And this is all part of a mystery spinoff that held their subjects in tight grasp, because they wanted that salvation and they wanted that immortality. And this is something that the Egyptians strove for very, very strongly, is to become immortal, become gods, okay? And this is why they stressed it so much in their religions, and the Egyptians were the true universalists. But not only this, but this mystery is the name of a system, okay? And the system is a secret or a mystery through the idea of silence by initiation into religious rites, okay? In other words, it's quiet. Everything is quiet. You don't know too much about it until you really get deep into it, okay? And that's why they have these secret societies and things like that. They were there to where they really don't know who they're worshiping. They just go through all of their rituals and all this kind of stuff until they get to a certain point, and then it's revealed to them who they're actually worshiping. By that time, it's too late for them to get out, or they'll die. Now, in Revelation 17:5, we read about this mystery, and it says, "And upon her head was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth." So notice that. It's Mystery Babylon the Great, okay? They make themselves great, okay, in their own eyes. And that's what Satan has done. Remember, it says in Isaiah, it says that Satan said, "I will lift myself higher above the throne of Yahweh." She will make herself really great. And she is the mother of the harlots, showing the mother she's the originator. She's the one who originated these things and brings forth her children, which are the harlots, her daughters. And notice the abominations of the earth, because every abominable thing that Yahweh says don't do is exactly what's taught in that religion. Now, historically, okay, this Nimrod system, the founder of Babylon, was the first man who came in opposition to Yahweh. Of course, Cush and his righteous ways is known as the god of the Chaldean mysteries. And that mystery name is Saturn. Now, the two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, okay, sometimes that book is hard to find, too. But the name of the system, he writes, this is on page 269, he says, the name of the system is Mystery. Mystery Babylon the Great. Here then we have the key that at Babylon, okay, here we have the key that at once unlocks the puzzle. We have now only to inquire, okay, what was the name by which Nimrod was known as the god of the Chaldean mysteries. That name, as we have just seen, was Saturn. Saturn and mystery are both Chaldean words, and they have correlative terms. They are correlative terms. As mystery signifies the hidden system, so Satan signifies the hidden God. To those who initiated, the God was revealed. To all else, he was hidden. Okay? And then a very interesting thing in McGavin's Protestant book that was written in 1839, quoted by Hislop on page 269, the two Babylonians. He says, in the litany of the Mass, okay, talking about the Catholic Mass, the worship service, in the litany, which is the writings, okay, it says, the worshipers were taught thus to pray: God hidden and my Savior, have mercy upon us. Okay? And I think that might also stem back to the part that, anybody here Catholic? Anybody remember Catholic? How you get up there and you beat your breast, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Okay? That was a part of it all. And I think that's probably had something to do in there, because if you remember, the Mass was all in Latin, okay? And Benedict, he really wanted to go back to that, to the Latin Mass fully in Latin, okay? And then everything would be completely hidden from the people, and you could keep them completely deceived. But Hislop, he also quotes from Chambers' Book of Days here on page 435, and he gives us information. He says, of the two Babylons, he says, whence can this invocation of the God hidden have come? But from the ancient worship of Saturn, the hidden god. As the papacy has canonized the Babylonian god by the name of Saint Dionysus, okay, and Saint Bacchus the martyr, so by this very name of the satyr is he also enrolled on the calendar. For March 29th is the festival of Saint Satyr the martyr. Okay? Now, this name Dionysus, okay, the saint, this person was also known as, here, let me put this on the screen. Okay, Dionysus, okay, was known as Dionysus, well, anyway, Sator, okay, S-O-T-A-R, or which means Savior, okay. He was known as the Savior. He was an ancient Indo-Greek king, okay, a Indo-Greek king. In other words, the Indians and the Greeks, okay. Dionysus' name is closely related to the Olympic wine god Dionysus, okay, who according to Greek mythology was also an ancient king of India. King of India, okay? This makes, a note there I wrote, this makes it much more easily understood why Constantine would have chosen Krishna as the name of the new God Savior, because Krishna is also an Indian god, is it not? Krishna comes from the Indian god, okay? Now keep that in mind, and keep in mind that this Saint Dionysus here that it talks about, which we just read here, okay? And in Krishna is a god of Hinduism, and Hinduism is the main religion of India, which includes the worship of many gods and the belief that after you die, you return in a different form. Now, this all we just talked about here is about remember all the stuff about the resurrection and stuff, right? They believed in the resurrection. So you can see here that now this also explains the fact that, because some people said, well, in the scriptures you see where it says about Christians, they call them Christians, and if Christ didn't come around till 300-something years later, then how could they be called Christians? Well, because the god Krishna had been around much longer than that, okay? Much, much long before the time of Constantine, okay? So this was an Eastern god here who was a king, who died. You got that? You follow me so far? He was a king. He was an Indian king, okay? Keep that in mind as we go on. I'll show you something else later, because you'll see the reason why Constantine brought used this name, and why it made sense that he did use Zeus and Krishna, okay? And you'll also see something else later, too, about what Pastor's been teaching. Okay, so he says the worship of the Hindu god, this hidden god, is what makes this a mystery, okay? It's a total mystery to people. And I'm reading again in the two Babylons here on page, let's see, pages 270, 271. He says, thus then, it is evident that in popular opinion, the original Latinos had occupied the very same position as Saturn did in the mysteries, which was equally worshipped as the offspring of the sun. Okay, remember all the sun worship, the sun god worship. It's all based upon sun god worship. Moreover, it's evident that the Romans knew that the name Latinos, okay, signified the hidden one. For their antiquarians, okay, that's somebody who finds old books and things like that and reads them, invariably affirm that the Latium received its name from Saturn, lying hid there. On the etymological grounds, then, even on the testimony of the Romans, Latinos, okay, is equivalent to the hidden one. That is, Saturn, the god of the mystery. So what I was saying is, Latin means the hidden one and so forth. While Saturn, therefore, is the name of the beast and contains the mystic number 666, Latinos also consists of the same number 666. That's if you take the geometry. Take like the A is equal to the value of 6, B is equal to the value of 12, C is equal to the value of 18, and so on and so forth. You just keep adding the number 6 to each letter in the alphabet. When you take the word Latinus and spell it out, and you add up all the numbers, it comes up to 666. And you can also do the same thing with Saturn. But it says it contains the same number 666. It's just as peculiar and distinctive and an affiliation as the name of the same beast. The Pope, then, as the head of the beast, is equally Latinos or Saturn, which is the head of the Babylonian mystery. So when, therefore, the Pope requires all of the services to be performed in the Latin tongue, he's talking about the Mass there, this is as much as to say that they must be performed in the language of the mystery. When he calls his church the Latin Church, that is equivalent to a declaration that it is the church of mystery. Thus, by this very name of the Pope's own choosing, he has, with his own hands, written upon the very forehead of his apostate communion, its divine apocalyptic designation, Mystery Babylon the Great. Okay? So, Babylon the Great here come down to us today. It's the same system that we see today. It's the same mystery sun god worship that's been way back in the time of Egypt. You see, and that's the reason why, too, like in Egypt, when you look at all of the archaeological things and stuff, you see where there's always sun disk, on the obelisk and all of these different things, on the temples and things like that. You see the pictures of the gods and the goddesses, and they're sitting on their thrones, and the sun is up between them. They always gave glory and honor to the sun. Now, we find here in Collard's Encyclopedia, volume 18, about the Egyptian dying and rising mystery gods and the Egyptian version of the Babylonian mother-son husband god and goddesses, which is not more than the Trinity, which came forth from Egypt. Okay, it says Osiris, probably the favorite god of ancient Egypt, is the central figure of a rich cycle of often contradictory combined myths, also portrayed as a tightly mummified human. And when you see pictures of them, you see how they took the wrappings and they wrapped around the person and mummified him. That's the way that you see Osiris. Osiris is all mummified. He's completely all wrapped up, except for his hands, with hands protruding, okay, from the wrappings, and he's holding symbols of sovereignty. That was his scepter and stuff that he held. He also held the Ankh, which was, what I was saying, the cross with the loop on the top, which symbolized eternal life. He was believed to have been a divine king on earth who died or was murdered and therefore ruled the netherworld. Now I want to stop there, okay? Notice that. Backing up just a bit, though, when you read where it says Mystery Babylon, okay, Yahweh said, remember, it tells you that they take the mark of the beast upon themselves, okay? And this great whore has this mark upon her forehead, right? It says in Revelation 17 there, that's written upon her forehead, Mystery Babylon the Great. Now, why the forehead? Because the forehead is where the mind is, okay? That's where you associate it with the thinking and The ability to think and so forth is in the mind. Now remember what Yahweh said in Exodus 13 verse 9. He says, and it shall be a sign upon your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, which is the forehead, right? That Yahweh's law may be in your mouth, and with a strong hand Yahweh brought you out of Egypt. Now remember, we're talking about Egypt here, and we're talking about the fact that Yahweh delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of all of these God worship, okay? Egypt was the first universal place of religion there, because they accepted all of these gods. They just went out, and this is why it was no different later on as time went on, and the Romans did the very same thing. Well, the Greeks did the very same thing, and the Babylonians did the same thing. You know, they all followed the same thing. Now, if you remember in Ephesians 4:23, it says that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man that is corrupt according to the deceitful lust, okay, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Well, if your mind didn't have to be renewed, okay, then you'd be all right. But you can see that the former conduct, which was taught to us through the God worship and stuff, these are the things that have to be renewed in our minds. Okay, and that's why it says Mystery Babylon. Upon her forehead was written Mystery Babylon the Great. Okay, that's where her line of thinking was, is upon these former lusts which corrupted a person according to these lusts of the flesh and so forth, and caused somebody to do these things. Okay, so when Yahweh talks about these things, it's not just pretty things that he says as a reason behind all these things. In fact, in Ephesians 2, verses 1 through 3, and it says, to you who are dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you walked in times past according to the course of this world, the course of the world, notice, according to the mother of the power of the air, that is now at work in the children of disobedience. Okay, this is Mystery Babylon. This is what's written in her forehead. This is what's written in the forehead of the people who take the mark of the beast upon themselves. They follow the mother of the power of the air, among whom also you once conducted yourselves in the lust of the flesh, performing the desires of the flesh and of the mind, which were by nature the children of wrath, just as others. Okay, and of course Yahweh called us out of the world and gave us the understanding that we needed to be able to keep his laws and to be obedient to him, to follow these things. Okay? Now, getting back to Osiris here. Osiris. Okay, now, in Deuteronomy 30, let me see. In Deuteronomy 30, verse 17, Yahweh says, but if your heart turns away and you're not obedient, and you're drawn away to submit gods, to worship them by serving them. Notice, service is worship, worship is service, right? You turn away and your minds are drawn away to submit to gods, right? Now, if, as the Christian world teaches, if Yahweh were a god, you would not be drawn away to worship gods. You would already be worshiping God. And some translations render the Hebrew word archer, okay, as other. But the word also could be translated hinder, referring to the gods worshipped in Egypt by many of the Israelites who were told to leave God worship behind, okay? I made it bigger and out, okay. So the Hebrew Aramaic English Dictionary by Marcus Jethro, okay, on page 40, and Gesenius, Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Edward Robinson on page 37, shows that word mean the word behind, the ones where Yahweh said, you know, leaving them behind, come out of Egypt, leave the hinder gods behind. But the King James says other gods, okay, like as if Yahweh is just one of their gods, okay. It means, the Hebrew and Aramaic English Dictionary by Marcus Jethro and Gesenius and Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon by Edward Robinson shows it means use of to be set behind, chiefly used of those who abandon a person or a party whom they have before followed, okay? Now, the party is like the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and so forth. These were parties, the religious parties in the days of Yeshua. But he's saying here, this word refers to the fact that you're supposed to leave these things behind. Notice, and it referred to a person or a party. Okay, a person could be the gods that they worshiped, or it could also be an actual person who was a God worshiper who they followed. Okay, and he says, leave these things behind. When he brought them out of Egypt, he said, leave all this stuff behind. Don't worry about these men who you once associated yourself with. He tells us the very same thing now, right? To separate yourself from God worshipers. Don't become a part of them and stay with them. Well, Pastor writes, he says the titles of Lord and God. He says when one uses this title Lord or the Lord or my Lord, they are actually praying to dead rabbis, dead pharaohs, or dead popes. Okay, that's what the word Lord means. And some people may not understand why he says that and what it refers to that. But if you look at Isaiah 26, verses 13 to 14, it says, O Yahweh our Father, Adonai, okay, which means lords, ruled over us instead of you alone. Now Yahweh says, I am Yahweh. I am Yahweh. That is my name. I will not give my glory and honor to another God. Right? But the lords ruled over them. And of course they ruled over them by force. Okay? But you, instead of you alone, O Yahweh. But the lords, the Adanim, and the gods, the Elohim, are dead. They will live no more. They're deceased. And they will not rise to reappear. Okay? Because remember what we're going to do. Okay? We're going to wipe out every god in the universe. Okay? The saints of Yahweh, the sons and the daughters of Yahweh, we're going to go out and destroy all gods. There will be no gods or goddesses throughout the universe, okay? That is our job. We're going to get rid of all of them, okay? Now, keep in mind, he says, keep in mind what, let me go back here to what Pastor wrote. Remember what he says here. He says, when you're worshiping the terms God, lords, when someone is called upon, they're actually praying to dead rabbis, dead pharaohs, and dead popes. Okay? All right, we read that. Now, Unger's Bible Dictionary tells you the word Lord says, the word Lord is Adon, okay, Adon, an early word denoting ownership, hence absolute control, okay? There's no getting out underneath the control from someone. Okay? It's not properly a divine title, yet they use it for the name of Yahweh. They replaced it. And you can see the reason why they replaced it, because man wanted to get that honor and that glory. Okay? Remember what we just read about leaving the hinder gods behind? Okay? Remember the word hinder we just looked at where it said referring to a person or a party that you once followed? Okay? They didn't want to lose that following. They wanted to keep these people under absolute control. Well, the word Lord is not properly a divine title, but it's used of ownership of slaves, rendered master. It's talking about a king as lords of their subjects. Kings. You got it? Kings as lords of their subjects. Lord Krishna became the savior of Christianity. You got that? Lord Krishna, okay, Krishna, okay? Krishna was an Indian Greek king. You got that? All of these people were dead people that they worshipped, that reached the status which we just talked about earlier. Remember, they went through their ritual purifications and washings and all these things to where they brought themselves up to a certain status to where they become deities. Okay, and they were worshipped as deities. The pharaohs were worshipped as deities. A pharaoh is a king. Okay, pharaoh in the Egyptian word for pharaoh actually just means great house. Okay, now the pharaohs in Collar's Encyclopedia. Okay, Osiris, probably the favorite god of ancient Egypt. He was believed to have been a divine king on earth who died or was murdered and therefore ruled the netherworld. So Osiris he was a king, had reached the state of becoming a god or becoming a lord. Okay? It also talked about, remember, Pastor said, we'll go back up, where he said you're actually calling upon dead rabbis, dead pharaohs, or dead popes. And we know how the popes are. And if anybody remember listening how the present pope right now, what he was referred to as? No one remembers? He's referred to as Lord. Okay? Pope Francis, this is just a headline, Pope from Zenith.org. Pope Francis gives a warm address to his brother cardinals. And in the article it says, he began his speech by saying, brother cardinals, not as Lord cardinals, as they are often addressed. And here's a translation of the Pope's address today when he received the audience participants in a plenary assembly of the congregation of the clergy, Lord cardinals, dear brother bishops and priests. Okay? So they acknowledge and they call themselves lords. Okay? They refer to one another as being a lord. Okay? That's why when Pastor says about that a lord is nothing more than the worship of a dead pharaoh, a dead rabbi, which is nothing but a teacher, right? Or a dead pope, this is exactly what's taking place. Okay? This goes way, way, way back to the ancient times, as we see why they always made these, like the Egyptians, okay, the dead pharaohs, okay, they made these huge temples and stuff to try and show how lords they were, you know, how big that they were, in order to impress upon the minds of the people who they were and to worship them, okay? And so every pharaoh was looked upon as being a god. He was a god on earth. But Yahweh says, don't make yourself into the image of the god. He warned us in the very beginning. And that's why this book is written here about devil worship or God worship, okay? It's all based upon these things. So now hopefully you get a little bit more understanding about that. When you read something, you'll be able to see that and comprehend. If anybody ever asks you about it, you'll be able to explain that to them. Okay, let's go back to Osiris here on page 325. Okay, so Osiris was this king, okay? And if you notice here, he was the king of the netherworld. This was the underground, okay? Osiris was the king of the underworld, and you know they believe that when a person died, I'm sure you've probably seen, maybe you haven't, but and they've uncovered these things within the pyramids and all this. But they used to have a boat, okay, and then they put all the different, they mummified all sorts of different animals and stuff along with the pharaoh and stuff, and they buried him in there with the gold and all these things, because it was believed that when he died, he would need that boat, and he would get on that boat, and the boat would go down the Nile River, and this would bring him down to the underworld, okay? And this is where Osiris was. Osiris would meet the person there, and then his heart would be taken out, and it would be measured on a balance with a feather, the feather of truth, and that would determine upon which way he would go from that point on, if he would be allowed to enter in and have eternal death. Can't say eternal life because he's dead, right? So eternal death. Okay, the concept of Osiris or as vegetation on earth, as an earth god, submerged in the annual Nile flooding and so forth, emerged again to bring forth the life-giving plants for mankind. Okay? So they always believed that the god had to die. Now remember, that's the difference between Yahweh. Yahweh can't die, okay? But the gods would die, and then they would be resurrected. When they were resurrected, that would be able to bring them forth to life, okay, to mankind. But notice, the most widespread myth, fully preserved only by late sources, associates him with Isis and Horus, the former as his wife and the latter as their son. According to this myth, Cyrus died, and as a result of a trick played on him by his jealous brother Set, who coveted the Egyptian throne. Notice, the Egyptian throne. These were kings. These were pharaohs that they're talking about. They took these myths and they made these myths into, a myth is a little story that they twist, okay? They're talking about this king who's on his throne, king of Egypt, who became this god, okay? And they made up these stories about him and stuff to prove a point and to keep the people into deception. Okay, Osiris's body was dismembered and scattered throughout Egypt. Okay, when it was rescued by faithful Isis, his wife, okay, the body retained sufficient virility to beget Horus. So there was just enough life in some of these scattered pieces that she had found. Okay, that was enough to be able to create her to get pregnant to have a child. Okay, that son, Horus, and he was born in a marsh-bound place, and he was nursed by Isis until he was big enough to challenge Set and avenge his father's murder. Okay, so again, what did she do? She taught her son to become a murderer, right? She taught her son to be vengeful. Remember, when Yahweh talks about the avenger, okay, he never, ever, ever made room in his law for someone to retaliate and to kill somebody because they killed one of their family members. Okay, we don't have time to get on all of that, but Pastor covered those things as well. But the gods always did this. The gods always took retaliation. That's why Cain took retaliation. It says another myth tells that Osiris was simply drowned in the Nile. In both, however, he descended into the water and then came forth with life-giving moisture and fertilizing power to sustain human beings. Okay? So they always had to have it look like that. Now, remember what Yahweh says and what Yeshua referred to as the water of life. Okay? Because life needs water, But Satan took this to make it look like as if, here this God is resurrected, and so now he has resurrected, now he comes forth as the Savior of mankind to supply everything that mankind has need of. But if that's the case, why didn't every man just die and become a god themselves? In the same way, they wouldn't have to need this God, right? But, it's all part of the deception. Osiris was worshipped in many places, notably in Upper Egypt, okay, and regarded as the myth as the burial place of his head. Here was celebrated the annual mysteries of Osiris, a drama that was enacted in which his struggle with his enemies, chiefly Set, was simulated in his disappearance, his death, was mourned with loud wailings and self-torment by the spectators. You still see these things going on, okay? Mourned, like the scripture talks about the mourning for Tammuz and stuff, the women mourning for Tammuz. But you notice this self-torture to the spectators, okay? I don't know what they call it, but even the Arabs or the Muslims and stuff, they're caught up into that. They have that little thing with some like beads or something hanging down it, and they throw it over their shoulder and they hit themselves with it. They constantly are beating with themselves, and this is when you did damage to yourself. Was it totally against what Yahweh says? Because Yahweh says don't self-mutilate yourself, but He says to love your neighbor as yourself, right? But they figure that this is a part of penance, that if you inflicted pain upon your body, then the gods would take notice. And they did, because they wanted you to do that. In fact, they wanted you to kill you, to get rid of everybody and get rid of every man on earth, But this is still taught today. People still do penance and stuff. You read about the places where the Virgin Mary appeared and stuff, where people will walk for miles on their knees, on rocks and thorns and, through all sorts of stuff. And their legs and their knees would just be completely raw by the time they get there. But this is looked upon as being so pious because they went through it and they did it, And this was supposed to grab God's attention, okay? It's to inflict pain upon yourself. This all goes back way, way back. It's nothing new, but the people were too ignorant to even know these things. Okay, and then finally his resurrection was celebrated. In fact, you read where the scripture says that, even with the prophet Belial, with the worship of Baal. They cut themselves and they gashed themselves, and they would work themselves up into a frenzy and start cutting slashes on their bodies and stuff and bleeding, thinking that this would attract the god's attention and that they would be saved by these things. But remember, the gods can never save. Now, as king of the dead, Horus, having surrendered or succeeded him as an earthly ruler, Osiris presided over the final judgment, which every man and every woman face, when hearts were weighed against the feather of truth. Okay, this is what I was talking about. They were on their boat and they were in the underworld, okay, and they were met. And he would take their heart and he would weigh it on the scale, and that would determine whether they would get in or not. The Egyptians hoped, now notice this, the Egyptians hoped by the use of magic they hoped by the use of magic to be in death identified with Osiris in the netherworld, and even to become as Osiris, triumphant over death and in the land of the blessed. Okay, so they dedicated themselves to this god, to Osiris, desiring to become like him. When Yahweh says, do not make yourselves into the image of the gods. Okay, so you can see why Yahweh said these things, because remember, Yahweh brought every time you read something like this about Egypt and stuff, it should strengthen your mind, and you should realize that these are the things that Yahweh was talking about when he says, don't go back into Egypt. And Yahweh took you out of Egypt. Don't worship and seek the worship of the people, how they worship their gods, and leave all of these things behind you. Okay, but remember, they didn't. Many, many people left in Moshe's time and went back to Egypt. Okay, even though Egypt was devastated because of all that had taken place, and remember, the Israelites went back in and actually took over Egypt and stuff because it was so weak. They didn't have an army either. Remember, that had been wiped out. Now, reading from Collins' Encyclopedia, notice this. It says, ultimately, each Egyptian considered himself as Osiris, also venerated in his own struggle to obtain his just desires and victories even over death. Each one called himself Osiris so-and-so, and in all his tomb inscriptions expected to share the fate of Osiris in the life beyond the tomb. So notice, they called Osiris so-and-so. You see what they're doing there? You see what was taught long, long ago. When Yahweh inspires, that's Yahweh talking, okay? And Yahweh inspired our beloved overseer. You remember this sermon when he said, you got to understand, I am Yahweh. I am Yahweh to you, and you are Yahweh to me. Okay? He didn't just say that for any reason. You see here how when they worship, they did the same thing with Osiris. They called themselves with the name Osiris. Osiris so-and-so. Okay? I am Osiris to you, and you are Osiris to me. Okay? Satan did the very same thing to pull these people away from the worship of Yahweh, to put this in their minds. And the world thinks we're crazy enough because we're called Hawkins. Okay? And yet, they will consider themselves as what? Christians. They're a Christian. Everybody is a Christian in the world, because they follow these gods. And yet, Hawkins means the priest of Yahweh, right? Wanting to become like Yahweh himself. So you can see how, from the very ancient times, how these things were twisted. And you see, when you read the scriptures, you see also, why, we're called the children of Israel, okay? That was prophetic in itself what Yahweh was doing, because it was after one man that he began this work named Israel, which would parallel along with the latter days of a man named Israel who would also have children, the children of Israel, And the plan of Yahweh has been from the very beginning, but it's always been corrupted and stuff, And you see how they called themselves by the name and prayed in the name of their heads and so forth, like Abraham's servant, prayed to Yahweh in the name of Abraham and stuff, So all of these things are written there as examples for us to know and to learn and to see how these things were twisted as they are today in God worship. Now, at this point, he says, remember what you read about the Egyptian mystery religion. Now we're going to read about the hidden God, because it says here, digressing at this point, he says, I must inform you that the people of ancient Egypt worshiped many different gods and goddesses. They were universalists, okay? They were universalists. They were their universal religion. And these abominations were at first worshipped at only locally, but as Egypt became consolidated into one empire, and you remember, Egypt was the first world ruling empire, and you read in Genesis where Egypt came from, okay? From Cush, his descendants and so forth. Then it became a world ruling empire, and the gods of the more influential cities acquired a national rather than merely local status. So, and that's what this article talks about here, is it starts off, they started off with local deities, little deities and stuff, and as the popularity spread, they became national deities, okay? But this is why when the Apostle Shalom met, when he went to Mars Hill and he saw these things and he saw the altar to the unknown God, you can see how these people, they relished the thought of anything that had to do with God worship. And they wanted to know, and, 1 week they might be worshiping one God, then next week they changed over to worshiping this God because they liked something there, and this week maybe they went over to this goddess over here and did this and so forth. They weren't loyal to certain deities all of the time. It was just like it was an open thing to whatever they wanted to do, But some gods and goddesses had very strong influence upon the people. And remember, it was the same gods and goddesses, they just changed their names when they went into another nationality, another location. But the worship was the same. And that's what this article here talks about. This is from Collins Encyclopedia. The underlined sections there, it talks about how the loyalty was never excluded, a readiness to accept other deities into their hearts and their shrines. And the gods of the more influential cities acquired a sort of national status as soon as the union of the two lands, referring to North and South Egypt, there was North and South Egypt because they were divided because the land area was so long, and when the Nile went through, and you had some of the more major cities further down, closer to the mouth of the river. But these divinities, more or less, were strictly localized. Okay, and then they became national deities. And I see on page 337, it says the gods whose cults were transferred to a new location occasionally superseded the native god. Okay, so sometimes they were worshiping one god, and then when this other god came in, it became very popular, and so therefore eventually it took over, and everybody began worshiping that deity instead. And this is what Yahweh warned against. Remember, he told them, he says, do not inquire as to how they worship their gods, or it's going to be a snare unto you. Because this was what was going on at that time. Yahweh was explaining these things, and look, all of these things are going. Remember what he says in Leviticus 18 through 20, right? He says, don't do these things, because all of these abominations have the nations done before you. And so therefore don't do these things. Okay, so like it says, there's nothing new under the sun. These things had all been done long ago. And he was warning them constantly, don't fall back into this. Now Osiris was not native to Abydos, but few Egyptians remembered the god who was, and Osiris, lord of Abydos, was the most loved of all the Egyptian gods. Okay, so eventually, all of these gods, the lesser known ones, were superseded by the other ones. So because the Egyptians exhibited a willingness to accept new gods into their worship, they were also willing to merge the most influential among them. Many of these gods were joined together to each other, all right, and their rituals was combined in order to serve both of them. Sound familiar? What did Constantine do? He took two gods and put them together, right? But also this was hidden gods that were associated with their influential gods that they merged. And this is why we find in our search for happy, and so forth, which we'll probably have to get into that next week. But let me, real quickly here, just look at the word universal, okay? The word universal, okay, it means it's done or experienced by everyone, existing or available for everyone. So, all of these gods could be worshipped freely by everybody. It's existing or true at all times and in all places, okay, and that's the way it was. Wherever you went, you were free to worship whatever you wanted to do. Universal means including or covering, including or covering all or a whole collectively or distributively without limit or exception. There was no exceptions. Whatever you wanted to worship or whoever you wanted to worship, it was freely given there, okay? So it was equal to all members. It was available to every member of society. Whatever you wanted to do, you could do it. And this is why all of the gods will worship. And this is why in the very beginning, Satan said, you will be as a god. Yahweh knows this, that you will know both righteousness and evil. And she's never stopped doing these things. It's continual. The system that was started up, the Nimrod system, has continued on to this day. It's never stopped. It's a continual time of confusion. So when you see Mystery Babylon, which is written on the foreheads and the minds and the hearts of these people, you remember what they think you do, okay? The actions proceed forth from the thoughts, and their thoughts are nothing but vanity. And that's the reason why Yahweh had the flood that wiped out the people, is because it says the world was continually evil, right? And there was violence throughout the earth, just as we see today, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the time of the coming of the Son of Man. So there's no different. These God worship, everything that we see here was alive and thriving thousands and thousands of years ago, but it's been thriving for thousands and thousands of years, okay? Because you can still find these things hundreds of years ago. When you look into even the history of man, you will find these things, because these gods and goddesses have never stopped being worshipped. It's just continual God worship, devil worship. Okay, we got to stop here on page 327.